Senator Hawley. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I start, Mr. Chairman, I want to say thank you for your strong statement on the RICA legislation yesterday and for your leadership on this issue. It's much, much appreciated. Director Stone Manning, let me just start with this. When you came before this committee in 2021, this is before I was a member of the committee, you were asked as part of your confirmation whether you'd ever been investigated, arrested, charged by any federal, state, or local law enforcement authority for the violation of any federal, state, or local law, regulation, or ordinance other than a minor traffic offense. We asked that question of all people before the committee. You answered no. Do you stand by that testimony?
Senator, I do stand by that testimony and was proud to be confirmed to do this job.
What's tree spiking, Director?
Senator, again, this committee engaged quite a bit in
No, that's a factual question. Do you know what it is?
And I do. It is.
You want to tell us? Go ahead.
Yeah, it's when people illegally put metal objects into trees so that they prevent a timber sale.
What happens if a chainsaw hits a spike?
Sometimes when a chainsaw hits a spike, it can buck the saw.
Yeah, violently recoil, potentially kill or seriously maim the loggers.
Yeah, which is why I notified the federal authorities that I had heard that happened.
Loggers like, for instance, George Alexander, this is from an article on the Washington Post explaining what happens when trees get spiked. Loggers who are blue-collar workers, by the way, these are not wealthy people. These are not people who have had the advantages perhaps you and others have had. People like George Alexander, who, for example, in May 1987, at age 23, his chainsaw hit a tree spike. I'm quoting, his face was slashed from eye to chin, his teeth were smashed, his jaw was cut in half. That's a typical reaction when a logger hits a spike. Now, you just said, I think just a second ago, that you were involved. There were 2 people convicted in 1989 of putting 500 pounds of spikes in an Idaho forest. Senator Rich mentioned this just a moment ago. You testified you sent a letter to the Forest Service on their behalf. I have it here. The letter says, among other things, this letter sent to notify you that the post office sale, that's the forest sale in Idaho, has been spiked heavily. The reason for this action is that this piece of land is very special to the earth. It is home to the elk, deer, mountain lions, birds, and especially the trees. It goes on, I would be more than willing to pay you $1 for the sale, but you'd have to find me first, and that could be your worst nightmare. P.S. You bastards go in there anyway, and a lot of people could get hurt. Why'd you send this?
Senator, as I said at the time, over 30 years ago, a really angry and turns out violent person handed me that letter and said, will you send this to the Forest Service?
And you did. Why?
What you just talked about in 1987 to a logger, this is 1988, 9. I understood that people could get hurt.
Why didn't you notify the federal authorities? Why did you send this threatening letter on behalf of these 2 men who were convicted of crimes?
I was terrified of them and wanted no involvement with them.
So you wanted no involvement, but you sent a letter that says you bastards go in there anyway and a lot of people could get hurt? Why didn't you just contact the FBI or anybody, any local authority?
Because the person who did this act threatened people's lives if they disclosed who did it.
Yeah, in fact, you were investigated for being involved, weren't you? Here we have a letter sent to this committee from the special agent of the USDA Forest Service, Michael Merkley, who was in charge of the investigation. He says, and he details this in the letter to this committee, that he investigated you for your involvement. He says, and I'm going to quote now, grand jury subpoenas were issued for hair samples, handwriting exemplars, fingerprints. These subpoenas were served on persons suspected of being involved, having knowledge of the incident, including Ms. Tracy Stone Manning. You've testified you were never investigated, ever for anything. Why'd you lie to this committee?
Senator, this committee delved deeply, went into the court records where I testified against these men.
Were you issued subpoenas?
No.
You were not issued subpoenas?
I was issued a subpoena to appear before a grand jury.
Really? Because here's what he says. Ms. Stone Manning was extremely difficult to work with. She was antagonistic. She was uncooperative, refused to provide her hair, handwriting exemplars, and fingerprints as ordered by the grand jury. It was not until after we informed her she would be arrested if she did not comply with the subpoenas that she provided the samples to me. So you were subpoenaed.
Senator Hawley,
you were the target of an
expired.
investigation.
Do you have a question?
You were the target of an investigation. You lied to this committee. Why?
Senator, I never received a target letter. I'm curious, I understand why this committee jumped over 30 years of my career in considering my nomination and went to a salacious moment from graduate school where I tried to protect people. What I don't understand is why we're not looking at the last 3.5 years now.
Here's why.
Senator
It's because people are killed in these kind of incidents. It is an act of terrorism.
Your time is expired.
A special agent in charge found that you were involved. You lied to this committee in saying that you were never investigated.
Senator
you were never
Hawley,
the target of investigation. In fact, you were.
Your time
you lied to us
is
blatantly,
expired.
and you know it.
Senator Brasso.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Stoneman, the Bureau's Rock Springs Resource Management Plan will devastate the people of Southwest Wyoming, lock up millions of acres of land, local communities. The entire state relies on those lands. The governor, state legislature, county commissioners, local communities all strongly oppose this plan. So why are you ignoring Wyoming's opposition to the plan across the board?
Senator, thanks for the question. As you know, the Rock Springs plan there's a draft out. There was a public comment period. There was a lot of hyperbole about facts that were not true about the plan. So we've done a lot of education work with your constituents about what's in the plan. More importantly, we extended the public comment period and worked with the governor. He stood up a task force, and those folks got to walk in the shoes of our BLM field staff in Rock Springs to give us recommendations for the final. We're digging in, looking at those recommendations, and I am certain that Wyomingites will see their voices reflected in the final.
Well, I just hope the BLM does not dig in, but actually reverses course on this issue. Last month, the Bureau took steps to prohibit coal leasing in the Powder River Basin. The Bureau claims that coal production in the region won't be impacted until the year 2038, so 14 years from now. The Bureau claims that existing leases are sufficient to meet expected demand for coal. My question then is, why is the Bureau taking this action now if you don't say it's going to have any impact for at least 14 years?
Senator, thanks for the question. As you know, the President has asked us to turn and transition to a clean energy economy. The lands in the Powder River Basin are leased through 2041. And so you see the draft or the final before you. The record of decision is still in formulation.
Well, I'd point out that a front-page story in the New York Times not too long ago pointed out that this president's pipe dream is not actually something that can be possibly done in our country and our needs for energy, as the committee hearings have shown again and again and again. I think this plan is completely reckless. Last year, the Powder River Basin supplied 45% of all the coal mined in the United States, and if this carbon-free grid doesn't materialize, and I don't believe it will, what do? You suggest that we start importing coal from China and other places?
Senator, I have great faith in the ingenuity of the American people. We are hard at work every day. We have permitted 7.9 gigawatts in just 3.5 years. I believe we can reach the transition the President has asked us to reach.
Well, I agree that the ingenuity of the American people, it's really hard when your agency continues to block efforts to produce the critical minerals that we need and so much of the product that we need for the American economy. So in April, your Bureau issued a rule that will dramatically raise bonding requirements on oil and gas producers. This is money that producers must pay up front in order to operate on federal lands. According to the data from your own department, there were only 37 abandoned wells on lands managed by the Bureau. It's less than 0.1% of all the wells that the Bureau manages. So how do you justify your decision to increase bonding requirements by as much as 25-fold?
Senator, both the Government Accountability Office and the Inspector General have written reports that suggest, I think rightly so, that our bonding rates, which are over 60 years old, are not high enough. We have thousands of idled wells on our public lands. And idled wells are the last stop before they become orphaned. Not all of them become orphaned, but the GAO found that thousands of them will.
Yeah, well, I don't buy it. This rule to me is completely arbitrary, it's punitive, and you're trying to drive oil and gas producers off federal land. I think it's disgraceful. Finally, in my remaining time, Wyoming is home to the large population of greater sage grouse and its habitat. For over 15 years, with Republican governors, Democrat governors working together, Wyoming has been at the forefront of adopting new management approaches to protect the species. Instead of working with Wyoming, your Bureau plans to upend the state's successful efforts at balancing conservation with economic development. Why are you ignoring a state that has proven time and again that it can successfully protect the species?
Senator, respectfully, I have a different view on our work with your state. We've been meeting twice weekly with the state of Wyoming as we develop the sage grouse plans. The only way to make these plans work is to work together with our partners in the states, and we have been doing so, and Wyoming has been helping us lead the way with the Sage Grouse Task Force at WGA. We are literally line editing the documents together, so I believe that they are going to have the durability that they need for success for the sage grouse.
Yeah, John Kennedy spoke at the University of Wyoming in 1963, and it was part of his tour of conservation in the West. And he said, we need to maintain a living balance between man's actions and nature's reactions. I have a picture of him giving that speech. Tom Udall's dad, who was Secretary of Interior, was with him that day in Wyoming, and it just seems that the BLM has gone a long way away from maintaining a living balance and basically trying to shut down the state of Wyoming. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ranking Member Bross.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Stoneman, the Bureau has yet to issue leases to the winning bidders of the December 2020 oil and gas leases. So it's now 2024, 2020 to 2024. When do you plan to issue the leases?
Senator, thank you for that question. We are still working our way through multiple court decisions. When we issue them, we want them to be durable and stick.
Because, you know, the law requires you issue the leases within 60 days, and it's now been over 3.5 years. So when do you plan, give me a date, when you plan to issue these leases that by law should have been released?
Senator, I don't have a date for you at this time.
Okay. 3.5 years, long time. Again, we need a date. Next, in June of 2022, the Bureau settled a lawsuit related to oil and gas leases that it had issued between 2015 and 2020 in Wyoming. In that settlement, the Bureau agreed to update the environmental analysis of the leases. So the Bureau's Wyoming office, the state office in Wyoming of the Bureau of Land Management, says they finished updating exactly what you wanted last summer. Finished what you asked for last summer. So why is your Bureau not then released this updated analysis?
Senator, again, as I was mentioning, we are reconciling different court decisions and opinions throughout the West, and we want to make sure that we are consistent.
Well, it seems like a lot of foot dragging. The state officers can't issue the permits to drill on these leases, refuses to until the Bureau releases the updated analysis, which was now done which was done a year ago. So again, when will the Bureau release that analysis?
I'm sorry, which analysis?
The one that was done a year ago by the Bureau, Wyoming's Bureau of Land Management, based on the 2022 settlement.
Yeah, again, Senator, I don't have a date for you.
Yeah, well, we need a date. And this, you can see how every member of this side says this is a deliberate sabotage of American energy by an administration with this approach, which is a pipe dream about their view of when we can get to a carbon-free America. And as our hearing showed last week, Mr. Chairman, China's beaten us to this because they're putting all the energy into AI, and that puts us at a competitive world disadvantage. Final question, so we're trying to keep this under 3 minutes. So last weekend, I was at the Wyoming Stock Growers Summer Convention in Douglas. A number of folks expressed concern about the process by which your Bureau considers public comments. Does the Bureau require individuals who submit public comments to identify who they are and where they are from?
Senator, I believe that is the case. And if I could revisit your last question, I don't think it's sabotage to be at record production highs for oil. and to issue 11,000 APDs.
It's a sabotage of public land use of the multiple use of the lands on public land. Well, so this is the question, getting with the question at front right now. So someone from a country like China or Russia or a computer which doesn't want us to develop our energy or our mineral resources, are they allowed to submit public comments? Is that correct? Because that's what we're hearing. The answer is yes.
Yeah, I assume they are.
It is,
yeah.
yeah, so they, can the Bureau even determine then whether a comment has submitted by a human or by a machine? The answer is no, you can't. In light of all this, shouldn't the Bureau give the most weight to comments from the people and the communities who actually live, as my friend and colleague just said, of what's happening in Idaho and what's happening, who actually live and most affected by the proposals?
You might have suggested that your colleague has bots putting in comments. I don't think that's true. We read the comments very thoroughly. I think that we can tell when it's a bot and when it's a Russian and when it's an actual Idahoan, as the case is with what we got from the lava project. I don't understand what you're getting at, Senator.
We're getting at the fact that it seems that the comments coming in and are being counted as equal are those that have been in the land for 5 generations and those coming from communist China. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Lee.
The Conservation and Landscape Health Rule that you recently finalized elevates non-use either on par with or arguably above multiple use. Now, according to FLPMA, BLM is required to manage for multiple use and for sustained yield, with multiple use referring to things like grazing, timber harvesting, energy, mining, and recreation. Can you cite a provision of FLPMA that allows for you to depart from that standard and to prioritize non-use instead of multiple use and sustained yield? What provision of FLPMA allows you to do that?
Title I, Section 103 is where the multiple use definition occurs in FLPMA, and it is very explicitly clear that managing for fish and wildlife habitat, managing for natural and scenic values, those are direct words from FLPMA, is our responsibility. And
yeah, look, I understand that, and that's as part of the sort of the recreation portfolio, and you've got the ability to do that. I don't think there's anything in there though that authorizes you to do exactly what you're doing here, which really is for deliberate, long-term non-use. This is a frustration that I have, and it's not just me that has it. I hear every day, all the time, from constituents, from local officials, who are increasingly frustrated at the direction that BLM has taken under your lead. Now, keep in mind, the federal government owns 67% of the land in my state, and the biggest share of that is Bureau of Land Management. And so we live as subjects to the Bureau of Land Management. And increasingly, BLM under your leadership seems to have taken an approach that manages these lands like a museum. It's a you can look but you cannot touch sort of approach. These are in people's backyards. You can hardly throw a rock in any direction in Utah and not hit federal land. Now, that portion of the land in my state, the portion of the 67% of the land in my state owned by the federal government, your portion of it amounts to 22 million acres in Utah. That's 7 million acres more than all of the land, not just the federal land, but all the land in the state of West Virginia. And month after month, a sweeping new policy or management plan seems to be imposed by your agency, harming Utahns who rely on the land for their livelihood, who rely on the land for all sorts of things. Now, the agency has strayed pretty far from its statutory mandate to manage this land for multiple use and sustained yield. The conservation rule is a pretty blatant example of this museum approach of you can look but you can't touch, one that's taken over the BLM. And I don't think it can be fairly reconciled with FLPMA. Now, Neda Wolf-Culver currently serves as the Director of Policy and Programs at BLM. And as you know, Ms. Culver previously worked as Senior Counsel and Director of the BLM Action Center at the Wilderness Society. While in that position, Ms. Culver was personally involved in advocacy and litigation regarding travel management planning and route closures in Utah. And in fact, Ms. Culver helped negotiate the settlement agreement a few years ago between various environmental NGOs and the Obama administration that established the process and the timelines for updating Utah travel management plans. Last fall, BLM closed 317 miles of historic roads in Utah as part of the update to the Labyrinth, RIMS, Gemini Bridges travel management plan. Director Stone Manning, Ms. Culver reports to you in her current role as Deputy Director. So I'd like a yes or no answer on this. Did Ms. Culver have any involvement in the decision-making for the Labyrinth RIMS plan?
Principal Deputy Director Culver does report to me, and the Labyrinth Travel Management Plan decision came from the ground where it should come from. And it was a part of a legal settlement. We got sued and...
No, I get that, but that's
Yeah.
not my question. My question is whether she herself had any involvement in that.
Senator, decisions like that sometimes come to headquarters for review. I don't know if that particular plan came for review or not.
Okay, so, look, she either recused herself from that decision or she didn't. Which is it?
Senator, she worked for the Wilderness Society and was wildly competent in that job.
Oh, I don't doubt that.
7 or 8.
That is not the subject of my question. What I want to know is, was she or was she not involved in that?
She does not have to recuse herself from the Wilderness Society. She is out of the recusal period.
Okay, so you're saying that it's okay for someone with a history of advocacy and litigation on these routes, not just routes like these, but on these specific routes. She was involved in litigation as an advocate specifically on these routes. Her name, I believe, is on the settlement, the consent decree documents that resulted in this process. Saying that it's okay for her to do this and that she can impartially oversee the BLM's travel management planning in that area.
Senator, we adhere to high ethical standards at the department, and we've done so here.
All right.
Senator.
Can I ask one follow-up? I'll be quick.
Very quickly, please.
All right, look, your updated Western Solar Plan expands solar development on public lands. How are you going to ensure that the expansion doesn't disproportionately limit other critical land uses, things like recreation and wildlife conservation and grazing?
Yeah, Senator, you've hit the nail on the head on what we do every day, right, is balance all of those uses. And the Western Solar Plan is going to help us guide solar development to places so that those decisions become more durable. So we've got this programmatic look at where development should go so that when we do the individual NEPA analysis, it becomes more durable.